Just know you're alive. That's enough for me.
At the recent headlines is enough to make an American have a panic attack. The dollar is done, says one story. A post-dollar world is coming, says another. And perhaps the most fear-inducing headline was, end of dollar dominance will also spell demise of U.S. hegemony. But before you go cashing in your dollars for old brass buttons and pieces of used string, you should probably hear what we've got to say about that. We'll get to the analysis part soon, but first let's have a look at why some countries have indeed been giving the dollar the cold shoulder as of late. The term we use for this economic phenomenon is de-dollarization. The same thing happened to the British pound at the start of the last century. As many of you know, the UK's superpower status took a hit after the First World War, when its economy shrunk, fighting what it perceived as the globally ambitious upstart nation of Germany. As this happened, the British pound sterling, as a reserve currency, was gradually replaced with the US dollar. The USA came out of World War I in relatively good shape, and after the World War that followed, the US was even stronger, both politically and economically. In 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement was signed, in which participating nations agreed their currencies would be pegged to the dollar. The dollar was then pegged to gold at a fixed rate. This meant that countries could trade together with a sense of confidence in the stability of each other's currency. It meant that they wouldn't get into currency wars, wherein a country might purposefully devalue its own currency for an advantage in trade. In short, the agreement was made to make the global economy stable. The International Monetary Fund was created for more stability, to give countries financial assistance if they needed it. After the chaos of the World War, such stability was a good thing. But of course, the fact the reserve currency was the dollar was also a very good thing for the USA. The dollar became the king of the economic jungle as the USA roared through the 20th century, often doing whatever the hell it wanted with significant economic and geopolitical advantages compared to other nations. The dollar was in demand. Everyone needed the dollar, and the US controlled it. Because of that, the U.S. was able to exert influence on other countries. Having the reserve currency also gave the U.S. trade advantages. There's also something called seigniorage, which in short means the U.S. made money from the production of money, since the cost of making it was less than what it was worth. It costs less than $10 to make $10, and everyone wants or needs the bucks. Cha-ching. This is a very basic explanation, but all you really need to know is when the dollar became the world's reserve currency, that suited the U.S. just fine. The U.S. doesn't want this to change, but other nations have recently been saying that they have been exchanging their dollars for gold at an astonishing rate, and also refusing to do certain trades in the dollar. The question is, why? Let's also give you some examples. In 2023, Saudi Arabia's finance minister Mohammed Al-Jadaan shocked the world when he said his country was open to doing oil deals in other currencies besides the dollar. This oil-rich nation had been trading its oil in dollars for 48 years. This really was a big story, and there are a few things to consider. China is one of them. Due to China buying about 1/4 of all Saudi Arabia's oil exports, China is Saudi's largest trading partner. The countries have been close for a long time, but it seems they're becoming even closer these days, just as Saudi Arabia's relationship with the U.S. has been somewhat strained at times. Importantly, Saudi Arabia is also a big part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, a multi-billion-dollar, maybe $1 trillion global development project that gives China tremendous influence around the world. This will help Saudi Arabia, heavily reliant on its oil exports, to diversify its economy. That will be needed when the world is less reliant on oil. These countries need each other. The two countries just made a deal in which state-owned Saudi Aramco will acquire a 10% share in the Chinese oil refiner Rongsheng Petrochemical for $3.6 billion. At that same time, the former will provide 480,000 barrels a day of crude oil to Rongsheng's refinery for 2 decades. The small print on the deal doesn't really matter for this video, but what does matter is China and Saudi Arabia are getting closer, and it also matters that they're talking about doing deals in yuan, not dollars. What was even more surprising in 2023 was China mediating between Iran and Saudi Arabia, two countries that certainly have not seen eye to eye for a long time. China is brokering deals in the Middle East, while the U.S.'s relationship with many countries in the region has been quite touch and go. Some people have even talked about a post-American Gulf. These nations may want to diversify their economies as the U.S. primes itself for conflicts with China and Russia. They aren't playing ball with the U.S., and the U.S. controls the world's reserve currency, so it makes sense to forego using that currency. As we said, because the U.S. holds the world's reserve currency, it can exploit its position. The word generally used is weaponize the dollar, which seems to be motivating countries to trade in other currencies. The US can implement sanctions on countries, as we've seen with Russia. It can devalue its own currency to win trade wars, but this might harm the rest of the world. Again, it might make sense to dump the dollar for some nations. This is exactly what China has been saying, that the US has...
Dear friend, do you see this man? On the right is Ukrainian President Zelensky.
Again, it might make sense to dump the dollar for some nations. This is exactly what China has been saying, that the US has been weaponizing their dollar. It's less a weapon, of course, if countries use it less. The more deals are done in other currencies, such as the Chinese yuan, the less the greenback is like paper kryptonite. It loses its power. To some countries, the US is acting a little roguish, abusing its position as the country with the global reserve currency. For instance, it was able to freeze $300 billion of the Russian central bank's foreign exchange reserves when Russia invaded Ukraine. While the US has the full support of many nations, it doesn't in other nations, even if they think Putin's invasion was wrong and what's happening in Ukraine is a terrible thing. Many countries believe this is a proxy war, and the US, a bully to some nations, just flexed its muscles and ignored a rules-based international financial system. This made them worry. They might now be thinking, so every time the US feels like it can just freeze reserves? Some critics have talked about how this has undermined the US's international credibility. What if they refuse to do as the US asks? What'll happen to them? Countries are suffering because of what's going on in Ukraine, but some of them, especially in the global south and the Middle East, are skeptical about the war and don't think they should be suffering for it. India's foreign minister was quite vocal about this when he recently said Europe thinks Europe's problems are the world's problems, but that world's problems are not Europe's problems. Some of these more neutral countries are not so critical of Russia, or even if they are, they take a broader view of matters, and in view of American foreign policy over the years, might not see things as black and white on the good and evil front. So, when at the 14th BRICS Summit in 2022, Vladimir Putin talked about creating a new international currency standard, some of them listened. They might be looking at the US's many sanctions over the decades and its somewhat coercive diplomacy and wondering if US dollar hegemony is in their best interests. The European Council on Foreign Relations said the world is divided on Ukraine. Importantly, it also wrote, people in these non-Western countries and in Russia also consider the emergence of a multipolar world order to be more probable than a bipolar arrangement. They're talking about a post-Western international order, which may mean an end to dollar hegemony. What we might now be seeing with countries foregoing the dollar is the start of this. Argentina was another country that lately announced it would start paying for Chinese imports in yuan, not dollars. The country's economy minister explained, following the worst drought in history, Argentina must keep its foreign reserves robust. In April 2023, Argentina said it was planning on paying for around $1 billion worth of imports in yuan and $790 million of monthly imports after that, also in yuan. This no doubt delighted China. Not so much the USA. While this might not have anything to do with the war, it shows how the country is strengthening its bond with China, and at the same time saying it wants less reliance on the dollar. Then you have Brazil, which the US has criticized for remaining neutral where the Ukraine war is concerned. Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, is not on any especially bad terms with the US, but his position on Ukraine has not exactly been in line with the US and the EU thinking. In 2023, he explained what some politicians and people in the global south have been thinking when he said NATO should not have been installing military bases that close to Russia, given the promises of the past. He criticized Western politicians for encouraging war and not doing enough to negotiate with Russia in the run-up to Ukraine's invasion. He also blamed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, saying he was as responsible as Putin for the war. The Ukraine foreign minister shot back, "We have to clearly note Ukraine does not trade its territories." Silva's comment obviously made some people's blood boil, but outside of the mainstream Western media, many analysts have said similar things. The British historian Geoffrey Roberts, whose specialty is Soviet diplomatic and military history, wrote in a recent paper, "Could war have been prevented by a Russian-Western deal that halted NATO expansion and neutralized Ukraine in return for solid guarantees of Ukrainian independence and sovereignty? Quite possibly." Many others say diplomacy was blocked by the US and UK. often citing the former U.S. ambassador to Russia and presently the CIA director William Burns, who in a cable to Washington in 2008 warned that unpredictable and uncontrolled consequences and war could happen with the enlargement of NATO. They also might refer to Alexei Arestovich, a former military intelligence officer and former advisor to President Zelensky, who in 2019 warned, "Our price for joining NATO is a big war with Russia." Some say the U.S. knew there would be war and went ahead anyway to weaken Russia. So some nations might be saying they will not suffer just for the U.S. to gain more global influence. In terms of this video, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. We're just trying to explain how some countries are thinking and the reason they might be upset with the U.S. They believe this war could have been prevented, and so they won't hurt for it. They're not willing to be an enemy of Russia. It's why Brazil, part of BRICS along with Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is just one of many nations that refuses to side with the US and NATO and will not agree to sanctions. Unsurprisingly, China has also talked about US hegemony and a new multipolar world. China just inked trade deals in Moscow. In a joint statement, they said Russia needs a prosperous and stable China, and China needs a strong and successful Russia. They added that they intended to increase the diversity and supply of agricultural products and food exports to each other. Russia's economy, despite the sanctions, has remained strong and will very likely stay strong for some years to come. One of the reasons is China, and the fact that many deals will now be done in yuan, not dollars. Brazil will too. In 2000, China wasn't even in the top 5 trading partners with Brazil, and now it's number 1. It's the only country in the region to have hit over $100 billion in trading with China, and more deals have been made. We might now be at $150 billion. Many of these emerging economies seem to be thinking in a similar way. We hope you're starting to see a pattern here. At around the same time as Brazil and China made those deals, South Korea and Indonesia also agreed to use their respective currencies for trade. About a year later, India and Russia signed the rupee-ruble.
Warning, you could soon lose your job because of what's happening inside this building you see behind.
Trade agreement. The U.S. had pressured India to reduce its Russian imports under sanctions to Ukraine, and the EU prohibited trade in euro-denominated banknotes to Russia, so India was between a rock and a hard place. It chose the route out, straight down the middle. The country has been criticized, but as you know, India said Ukraine is Europe's problem. It said it's just taking care of business, and its moral duty is toward its own citizens. Ukraine said India is acting immorally and adding to Ukraine's suffering. But guess who is India's biggest arms supplier by far? Russia. It supplies 70% of India's arms. There's not a chance in hell India will turn away from trade with Russia. India has already inked a new bilateral payment scheme, meaning not in dollars, with the United Arab Emirates. Sticking with Asia, Bangladesh, Kazakhstan, and Laos are now in talks with China about new payment mechanisms. Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand have all agreed to trade outside of the dollar. The Indonesian finance minister said in 2023 that the sanctions on Russia are a valuable lesson, saying countries will now just do transactions directly, bilaterally, using their local currencies, which he said was probably good for the world in the long run. Maybe not for the US, though. These countries don't want to choose sides. Their economies and their safety of their people, they say, might not allow them to choose sides. Like India, they might say it's easy to tell us what we have to do, but try being us. It should be said that the US's dollar brute strength of late, thanks to the US Federal Reserve raising interest rates, has also wreaked havoc in their nations, with the very poor being profoundly affected as food prices increase dramatically. In Singapore, a journalist summed this all up, saying the US dollar has become a wrecking ball. Also, when European nations found they couldn't pay for Russian energy, Russia just demanded that they do the deal in rubles. Russia supplies gas to 23 European nations. While Europe is against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, some countries obviously feel they can't live without Russian gas. Reports state that 4 countries in Europe have already started to pay in rubles, and 10 European companies have opened accounts at Gazprom Bank so they can start paying Putin's chosen currency. Can the U.S. do anything about such an activity? Some think not. They think the U.S. doesn't have the ability to control other nations anymore, or at least not as it had in the past. Open Democracy wrote in 2023, the power of Western powers is undeniable, but it is also undeniable that the world is increasingly moving toward multipolarity. The article said that the global South will not be bullied. Many others argue that the days of do what we tell you or else are coming to an end, and de-dollarization is proof of that. De-dollarization is certainly catching on, which has led some pundits to call this a revolt against the U.S. and its dollar. They say weaponization of the greenback doesn't work anymore. Bloomberg reported that at least a dozen countries in Asia are experimenting with a dollar alternative. It said this was unthinkable not even that long ago. The criticism isn't just coming from outside the U.S. An investment strategist in the U.S. told the Straits Times the Biden administration made an error in weaponizing the U.S. dollar in the global payment system. That will force non-U.S. investors and nations to diversify their holdings outside the traditional safe haven of the U.S. Another thing that's happened is countries buying gold with their dollars. They may not feel right now the dollar is their safest bet. Gold is probably safer, given they don't know what the U.S. is going to do next, and inflation could be on the way. China and Turkey were the biggest buyers, with India, Qatar, and Uzbekistan also ranking highly on the list. It was the biggest gold buyout in history by central banks. In 2022, they bought 1,078 metric tons compared to 450 tons in 2021. Again, this is countries thinking the dollar is at risk. A Japanese analyst explained gold buying by central banks is a sign that the dollar's dominance is eroding. This gold purchasing activity is expected to remain rampant as countries opt for a safer economic path. So diversity is the word on the street in economics these days, just as much as it's one of the most used words regarding cultural issues. The world's economies are diversifying. In evolutionary terms, they're adapting to a new environment. It's survival of the fittest. But what will these new adaptations mean for the U.S.? Some might say that the answer to this is the same as the answer to what happens to the alpha male chimpanzee when he leads with too much violence and is often unfair to the troop. Rebellion is the answer, always violent rebellion. But is this way over the top? Is the story of rebellion and the end of the dollar being exaggerated? Don't have a panic attack yet, is what we say. We call this the good news and the bad news segment of the show. Let's start with the good news for the people that don't want to see the end of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Okay, so first of all, changing a reserve currency would take a long time. You can't just supplant the reserve currency for the simple fact that about 60% of the global foreign currency reserves are in the dollar. It took many decades for the British pound to be replaced. It would be the same with the US dollar. It's true that in 2000 the dollar was 71% of global foreign currency reserves, but 60% is still a lot more than the yuan in circulation at 2%, the euro just 21%, the yen at 6%, and the British pound at 5%. As one analyst said, changing the reserve currency would be like telling the world that the English language should be replaced as a global language. The dollar is not done. If we look at global trade throughout the entire Americas, close to 96% of trading is in the greenback. That's not going to change anytime soon. Sure, in Europe, the euro is the currency of choice, but even then, 23% of trades are executed on the dollar. As for Asia-Pacific region, 74% of trading is done using the dollar. The rest of the world, 79% of trades use the dollar. You also need to know this. In 2022, the USA bought around $3.3 trillion worth of goods from other countries, but other countries only bought $2.1 trillion from the US. That leaves what we call a trade deficit, $1.2 trillion, not pocket change. So the foreign countries are sitting with a stack of dollars. They could spend it elsewhere, maybe in China, but then they'd have to convert their...
If your back or neck hurts even in the morning, it is most likely because you sleep incorrectly. The good news is that there is an easy way to fix it. Recent studies have shown that over 75% of people have long-term back problems only because they sleep in the wrong position. We all know how important it is to keep the correct posture during your active hours, but most doctors won't tell you maintaining the correct posture while you sleep is even more crucial. Sleeping in the wrong posture can cause inevitable effects on your body. This includes chronic neck or back pain, rounded shoulders, neck problems, fatigue, headaches, or even spinal dysfunction and joint degeneration. Some research even suggests the wrong sleeping position may cause toxins to filter out of your brain more slowly. While you can keep control of your posture during the day, it is much harder to do it while you sleep. A team of European spinal specialists found out that almost 90% of these problems are caused by people choosing the wrong pillow. Even if the pillow feels comfortable, it is almost never made to be ergonomic or healthy. In fact, that is how the big brands trick you into repeatedly buying new pillows from them. When you first try a new pillow, it feels soft and amazing. However, this only lasts for a very short time. The pillow starts to wear off and loses its shape quite quickly. It is also known that traditional pillows absorb plenty of germs and bacteria. That's why you see more and more manufacturers recommending to change your pillow every 6 months. That doesn't sound right, but not for the big corporations making huge money from this problem, instead of trying to solve it. Luckily, these specialists from the European Spinal Treatment Association realized the public needs an alternative. After 9 months of intensive research and testing, they introduced Durella. A reinvented pillow using a 21st century technology. Unique ergonomic design and nano memory foam infill give complete relaxation while maintaining your posture correct, no matter in which position you sleep. You also can forget acne and pimples problems because it comes with an anti-allergic machine washable cover that wicks away germs and bacteria. Just look how it gets back to its original shape. Not like regular pillow, it stays in shape even after years of use. High-quality memory foam adjusts to your shape and weight. Meanwhile, the neck nook gently cradles your head to reduce tossing, turning, and restlessness. It also has cooling layer to regulate temperature so you can sleep in comfort. After inventors saw how well it worked, they started selling the product online. What they didn't expect was it will go viral on social media with thousands of customers posting their 5-star reviews.
It works much better than any other memory foam pillow that I've used before.
Super comfortable, it's chemical free, and made with premium ingredients.
I've been using it for a couple of weeks now, and oh my god, absolutely love it. It's helped with my sleep so much.
Since using the Gorilla pillow, my sleep has transformed massively. It really supports my spine and neck with its ergonomic design.
Since launching the product was sold out 3 times already. The inventors just tripled their production facilities, so now you can get it while supplies last. Regular and cheap pillows twist your neck into opposition so your joints and muscles sore, causing huge neck and back pain. But now you can have an affordable pillow that instantly reduces aches, stress, and tension by supporting your spine and neck in perfect position and giving you the rest you deserve. Want my advice? Get rid of your pile of old pillows and visit the official Gorilla website to get the only one pillow you need. Now there's limited time opportunity to get Gorilla with a 50% discount while supplies last, and the price is set to increase at any moment. Click the link below to get it now.
Not long ago, Rita Levi-Montalcini celebrated.
Guide yourself and troop to the next galaxy in 7 seasons. Burn, ice, cold.
At us this week, there is what we call a cheers. This week we shouted out a cheer to the singer, songwriter, and actor Jill Scott, who first came into the nationwide eye with the Philadelphia legendary group The Roots. We applauded her rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner at the 2023 Essence Magazine Festival in New Orleans at a packed Caesars Superdome, which is, as Revcom said, yes, that Superdome where some tens of thousands of black people were crammed into the most horrendous living conditions after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Scott wrote her version of the U.S. national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, more than 30 years ago when she was a 19-year-old living in North Philadelphia, and she has been performing it while touring this year. Essence Magazine tweeted out, quote, "Everyone please rise for the only national anthem we will be recognizing from this day forward. Jill Scott, we thank you," end quote.
Oh, say, can you see by the blood in the streets that this place doesn't smile? This is not the land of the free, but the home of the slaves.
Oh, say, can you see by the blood in the streets that this place doesn't smile on you, colored child, whose blood built this land with sweat in their hands, but will die in this place and your memory erased? Oh, say, does this truth hold any weight? This is not the land of the free, but the home of the slaves. Again, not the land of the free and the home of the brave, but the home of the slaves. Know this U.S. national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, was written by Francis Scott Key, who grew up on a slave-owning plantation in Maryland and bought and sold slaves himself. He wrote a verse that condemned the British, who the U.S. was fighting when he wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. What for? For promising to free escaped slaves.
But he makes a reference to the hireling and the slave in the third verse. That's a reference to how the British encouraged enslaved Americans to come to their side during the War of 1812 to get their freedom, which thousands did.
He refers to the foul footsteps of the slaves.
Francis Scott Key spoke of the inferiority of black people. And while this history is not my main purpose in this brief commentary on Jill Scott's rewriting of the Star-Spangled Banner, it reveals just how deeply woven into the fabric of this country that this song remains the song that people stand for at every damn sporting event, for which players have been driven out of professional basketball and football teams for refusing to stand, and more recently for taking a knee. Jill Scott's rendition at the Superdome brought forth two responses, one from the Republican fascists who went apeshit, racist and fascist over her song, some tweeting that she should lose her citizenship. Not an idle threat when Pig Trump, currently the runaway front-runner in the Republican nomination for president in 2024, has been threatening, quote, casting out, end quote, those who, quote, hate our country, end quote. The other big response is from masses of people, especially middle-aged and older black women and men, expressing big love for Scott for singing the truth that, as one person put it, we live this every day. Here in America, there's not a day that goes by that some one of us is not experiencing that this is slavery in America, and it's not over, end quote. I want to say this to all who applauded the righteous truth that Jill Scott sang. We hear you. And we hear the same in responses to TikToks by the Revcoms and by our leader, Bob Avakian, that speak the truth of the oppression of black people in this land of the thief and home of the slave. But as Bob Avakian has said, quote, the truth will not set us free in and of itself, but we will not get free without the truth. Freedom requires struggle. Freedom requires knowing the problem you face. For one to really be free requires freeing all, emancipating all of humanity. To know how to do that requires science that goes to the roots of the problems we face, and then ripping up those roots and changing the world from the oppressive nightmare it is today to what it could be. And that's where revolutionary leadership comes in. That's where Bob Avakian and the Revcoms come in. That's why if you are serious in your convictions, if you believe the truths that Jill Scott sang carry weight, then you have to act on them, because there is a way out of the madness. Get your hands on and dig into the proclamation, We Are the Revcoms, and the declaration we need. We demand a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system. And get into the Bob Avakian interviews on this, the RNL show. You just saw a part of them where Bob Avakian puts forth a central part of the strategy. Fight the power and transform the people for revolution in the second of these interviews. Got questions? Watch this show, the RNL show, and binge watch every show since May 1st. Write us, DM us, and call the Rev Club. Leaving your appreciation at this show on social media with a thumbs up, like, or a write on leaves you and millions like you and billions of people around the world facing a future of increasing horror. and perhaps even extinction from this capitalist system's destruction of the environment, or even a game-ending all-out nuclear war. It's not enough. It's not right when there is a solution. Listen, among the 500,000 people who have seen the TikTok of Bob Avakian speak the truth about the murdering police in his dialogue with Cornel West, one person commented this, quote, "Phew, a lot of people are not ready for this conversation." All right, yes, a lot of people aren't ready for that right now, but a lot of people like you are, or you wouldn't be writing what you did, or hitting the like button, or some other emoji routine. Routine won't cut it in a time like this. Things are coming to a head in this country and the world. We are living in a time where there are fascists who are moving to turn back time to an even more vicious, overt white supremacy, along with demeaning, degrading, and throwing women, immigrants, and LGBTQ people back into a hellish nightmare. The Democrats have no answers either. They actually tell you that they really can't do shit, but they repeat the same old shit, slathering honeyed promises over the same oppressive system. It's time for a real change. It's time for a real revolution. Things are sharpening, and as they do, more and more people are going to have ears and hearts for the message of revolution. It's time for you to stop turning away from what needs to be done. We hear a lot of older heads saying that these youth out here aren't doing shit but messing each other up. It's madness. Well, if you see the madness, stop your whining and pick up the tools these youth need in the proclamations. We are the RevComs, and we need and we demand a whole new way to live in a fundamentally different system. And with this RNL show, especially the BA interviews, and go get these materials to the youth and to everyone who has a heart for and a thirst for being a part of emancipating humanity. Now is the time. Revolution is needed. It's possible. There's leadership, a strategy, and a concrete liberating plan for a far better new society. There is no time to waste.